Is my voice clear? Uh,
Yes, yes, you are.
Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, selamat siang, Bapak Ibu. And welcome to the article discussion series organized by the FBS Reading Club Universitas Negeri Semarang. Terima kasih atas kehadiran Bapak dan Ibu dosen dan seluruh peserta yang telah bergabung pada acara hari ini. I would like to extend my respect and greetings to Wakil Dekan 3 Bidang Bisnis, Riset, dan Kerjasama FBS Universitas Negeri Semarang, Bapak Muhammad Yusuf Ahmad Hasim, PhD. Our esteemed main discussant, Mr. Aoyong Wei Kit from the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University Singapore. Dan selamat datang kepada semua pembahas. uh, First discussion, Mr. Fabricus Joko Yulianto, PhD. Second discussion, Ms. Virindra Putri Dewi, SPDMA. The third discussion, Mr. Dandi Buyung Yuda, SPD MPD. The fourth discussion, Ms. Urota Ayunaina, SPD MPD. And the fifth discussion, Dr. Hanifah Nur Insani, MPD. Dan
Pada
kepada
seluruh
seluruh dosen dan peserta yang terhormat,
dan peserta
terima
yang
kasih
terhormat,
atas
terima kasih
kehadiran
atas kehadiran
pada acara hari ini.
pada atau
So, this afternoon we will have a meaningful discussion on the theme Learning Method Pedagogy Hop Envisionment Building through Poetry Memorization and Recitation. Without further ado, let's begin our session. Uh, the first session is now. I would like to invite the Presiden FBS Universitas Negeri Semarang, Bapak Muhammad Yusuf Ahmad Hasim PhD, to deliver his remarks and officially open today's session. Pada Bapak Muhammad Yusuf Ahmad Hasim PhD, waktu dan tempat kami persilakan. Monggo, Pak.
Terima kasih Mas Muhammad Adi. Cipta ya. Uh, Excuse me, I apologize. I use Indonesian language. So I ask for help to mungkin Prof. Ines or Bu Grindra, Bu Sri Sumaryani to translate my speech. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Selamat siang dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua yang terhormat. Mr. Waikit PhD, Profesor Profesor Ines, eh, Bapak dan Ibu dosen pembahas, serta seluruh hadirin yang berbahagia pada siang hari ini. Puji syukur kita panjatkan kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Atas rahmat dan karunia kita dapat berkumpul dalam acara yang istimewa ini. Izinkan saya atas nama Pak Dekan Fakultas Bahasa dan Seni menyampaikan penghargaan yang sebesar-besarnya kepada Mr. Waikit dari National Institute of Education Nanyang Technological University Singapura yang telah berkenan meluangkan waktu untuk membagikan ilmunya kepada kita pada siang hari ini. Pada hari ini kita kembali melaksanakan FBS Reading Club, sebuah kegiatan yang bertujuan untuk memperkaya wawasan, memperdalam kajian ilmiah, serta membangun budaya diskusi yang produktif di lingkungan Fakultas Bahasa dan Seni di Universitas Negeri Semarang. Saya ingin mengapresiasi dan mengucapkan terima kasih kepada gugus penelitian pengabdian, kepada semua pihak eh, atas kerja keras dalam menyelenggarakan acara ini. Forum seperti ini merupakan wujud komitmen kita dalam meningkatkan kualitas akademik sebagai dosen, sekaligus membangun jejaring keilmuan yang lebih luas baik di tingkat nasional maupun internasional. Pada kesempatan kali ini tema yang Nah, sangat-sangat diangkat sangat baik, sangat relevan, di mana learning by heart as a pedagogy of hope, envisionment, building through power tree memorization and recitation sangat relevan dalam pendidikan bahasa dan seni. Kita tahu bahwa menghafal dan mendeklamasikan puisi bukan sekedar aktivitas berbahasa, tetapi juga sarana untuk membangun kepekaan, estetika, imajinasi, serta nilai-nilai harapan dan kemanusiaan dalam pembelajaran. Kehadiran Mr. Waikit sebagai narasumber kali ini menjadi kesempatan yang berharga bagi kita. Beliau adalah akademisi dan praktisi yang memiliki banyak pengalaman dalam bidang ini. Selain itu, kita juga akan mendengarkan pandangan dari para pembahas seperti yang telah disampaikan oleh Pak Wara tadi, Bapak Hendrikus PhD, ada Ibu Gerindra Putri MA, Bapak Dani Buyung MPD, Ibu Korota Ayu Naina MPD, dan Ibu Dr. Nur Hanifah MPD yang akan memperkaya diskusi kita nanti. Saya yakin diskusi ini akan sangat bermanfaat dan memberikan inspirasi bagi kita semua. Saya juga ingin mengajak Bapak dan Ibu untuk tidak hanya berhenti pada diskusi ini, tetapi juga menjadikan diskusi ini sebagai pemantik bagi riset-riset kita lebih lanjut nanti, serta mengimplementasikan di dalam di kampus atau di kelas. Tidak berpanjang lebar, walaupun sudah berpanjang lebar, saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada gugus penelitian, pengabdian, kepada masyarakat, dan publikasi ilmiah yang telah bekerja keras untuk menyelenggarakan acara ini, serta kepada seluruh peserta dan hadirin yang telah meluangkan waktunya untuk bergabung. Semoga kegiatan ini berjalan dengan lancar dan kita semua mendapatkan manfaat yang sebesar-besarnya. Akhirul kalam, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih kepada Bapak Wakil Dekan atas sambutannya dan atas pembukaan resmi sesi diskusi pada hari ini. The next session is group foto bersama. Mungkin bisa on cam semua, Bapak, Ibu, dan peserta acara hari ini. Okay, slide one. Please on cam. I will take a photo. Okay, next slide. Second slide. Eh, Selanjutnya, izinkan saya memperkenalkan moderator kita hari ini, Bu Sri Sumaryani MA. She will get us through the presentation and discussion today. Pada Ibu Sri Sumaryani, the time is yours.
Right, thanks very much, Mas Muhammad Dipta, for guiding us all through this main event, the discussion. But before that, let me, explain what has been stated by Bapak WD3 or the Vice Dean 3 of our faculty to the participants and also Mr. Waikit. So the Vice Dean 3 of our faculty stated on behalf of the dean stated his appreciation to Mr. Waikit for his willingness to share his knowledge and also ideas represented through a journal article that we're about to discuss this very afternoon. So, everyone, welcome to the fifth article discussion series held by FBS Reading Club. And today we're going to discuss an article with the title Learning by Heart as a Pedagogy of Hope, Envisionment Building through Poetry Memorization and Recitation. And it's very special today because we have the author of this very article with us this afternoon, Mr. Waikit Oyong. Hi, Mr. Waikit.
Hi, Yanni. Yeah, thank you, Prof. Thank you, Yanni, and thank you, Dipta, and thanks everyone. Yeah, just call me Waikit, and yeah, looking forward to sharing today.
Okay, Waikit, then thanks very much for being here. And just for your information, we will have 5 discussants, and you will be the main discussant later at the end of the session. But then I have a special event for you. So to welcome the discussion session, I would like to invite Professor Puji Astuti or Professor Ines to do some poetry reading for us. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Ines. Please, Professor Ines.
Thank you, Bu Yani. Well, Bu Yani, Waikit, Ibu Bapak, I hope that this would serve as not a welcome drink, but welcome poetry for Waikit. So I'm gonna recite a poem, but before that, I would like to give a bit of its background. So, Waikit, Bu Yani, and everyone, I am an introverted person. I like silence. I love solitude, but at times I find that the world is too noisy for me. And not so long ago, I learned from Dat Bao, a scholar from Monash University who came to our master's program here at the faculty. He gave us a public lecture on pedagogy of silence. So I found relevance with his work. So, Waikit, I teach here at the English Language Education Program, and my area of research is active learning, especially cooperative learning. That's why I think I'm still in a quite distance with the word or the concept of memorization because of its closeness to rote learning. But thanks to your last year's RELC presentation, the article, and hopefully today's presentation will give me conviction of the power of memorization, and I will gain a better understanding of pedagogy of hope. And it can be realized through memorization as a way of learning by heart. So, long story short, Ibu Bapak, as I was reading Waikit's article, I picked this one poetry. And the way I prepared this performance, this quick performance, is that I read Waikit's article, and at the same time I picked this article. So they're actually on my monitor, like side by side. So I'm learning from Waikit's points regarding memorization for envisionment, and at the same time I put it into practice. So I memorized this short poetry by Rudy Francisco, and I'm trying not to look at my notes as I'm doing this performance. So here it is. Silence. I'm learning that I don't always have to make a noise to be seen. And even my silence has a spine, a rumble, and says, I'm here in its native tongue. So that's it, the short poetry as a welcome poetry for Waikit. I hope you like it, and I'll put the poetry in the chat box, and I'm turning this over to you, Bu Yani.
Thanks very much, Professor Ines. It's indeed a very short poem, but then the effect that it has uh, for us, especially introvert persons like me, mean a lot. Yes, we love silence, right? So thanks very much for opening this session, this discussion session with that lovely poem. And now, I think without any further ado, we would move to the a discussion series or session. We have 5 discussants, and I would like to invite the first discussant. Girindra Putri Dewi Saraswati MA will be the first discussant. So I would like to say hi to Mbak Gir. Hi, Mbak Gir.
Can you hear my voice?
Are you there? Okay, you're ready. Mbak Gir is currently teaching at the English education department, English education study program. And she has interest in teaching English as a foreign language or TFL, TEFL. So you have 10 minutes, Mbak Gir, please.
It's nice to have you.
Pak Hendrikus.
How should I put it? Like it?
Okay.
It doesn't like it. Yeah, I hope like people call you like it. So thank you very much for having me also. Yeah, thank you. Well, so I tried to be in a place before, but then because I'm moving, but I will be my best to keep the network okay, and hopefully it will be okay. So it's a better for me to given this opportunity, like it and everyone, because this is like my very first time, like sorry, okay, it is like my very first time to read and trying to integrate the kind of literature into my area, the English language. As Yanni mentioned before, the immigrator, that my area is English language teaching, the same with a Prof. Puji. So I would like to try to relate what you have written here to my area in English language teaching. And if you come some kind of an introduction that in English of language teaching, we are not quite talking about poetry law. So it's more like to be inserted in chapter on, let's say, in one activity throughout the whole of the English lesson. So that's why I put the title here, discussing both, because when you read and then read about the pedagogy of it, make me like Google it like several times, trying to understand what it is new to me. This also because I see after I read everything that there will be a to implement this into the practice. So we would like to discussing both here. Okay. So when I read your work and then I got to learn about several key terms. So the first is about memorization and recitation, and also recitations comes next. And the third one is about the investment building and vision. Make me like try several times to pronounce it and vision. And then also the pedagogy of Hive itself. When I was about the first page of your paper, and then there was the question that you wrote there, maybe statement that although the memorizations now is in outdated something, and I think it is very relatable in my area because I always keep to the reservist teachers, to the teachers, to the actual teachers that please don't ask your students to memorize. Don't use the memory, just practice, put into context. I never really see that memorizations itself here now can become also a possibility when it is given in the proper technique or a proper way, a proper treatment. So it brings me to think about the key concept about this four, which is to cultivating deep understanding and also to give a multiple perspective through the literary engagement. So far, we don't really learn about literary a lot. literature work, and that's why we kind of cringe about this. But I think there is a hope that with the deep understanding, our way to let the students to understand about a literary work, so and to see the literary from the multiple perspectives, so it can become one possible way um, to in English language teaching, in an English learning. So, I read yours and then I try to find the relevance to the English language teaching. So when I kind of think and also I try to imagine what will I do when I'm memorizing poetry. Then I'm thinking about myself, about my children when they are memorizing poetry or singing. So what they are going to do is to repeating the poetry, repeating the song, repeating the word that they are actually trying to memorize. It will become them to be like a recited frequently, and it will help uh, to improve their language retentions and also their fluency on how to recite the poem in a proper pronunciations. Also, will let them to be more fluent. So it promotes fluency when we ask the students to keep repeating the poetry that they actually memorize. And also by learning about the poetry itself, they will learn about the culture and also they will try to connect their emotions into the contents of the poetry itself. So it's some sort of a package that we can promote to the students, to the teachers, so that they are going to implement what we call as a literary work in the classroom. So I told you before that it is new for me about the pedagogy of hope, which makes me like Google it several times because I am afraid that I will say it wrong. So the in the pedagogy, I think, in learning the pedagogy of hope here, I learned that this is to learn about some literary word in a kind of a certain way to make it well imagined, and also it is well spoken, well applied by the students. So I kind of I'm kind of trying to conclude myself that these poetry recitations will encourage the students to have their self-expressions, and then they will also build more like a confidence in the students when they are using a foreign language, because repeating, trying to memorizing, recite, and sing in a several time in a frequent way, it will bring their confidence, and then it will also teach them on how to deliver a certain sentences properly. And I'm trying to also link, connect, so about this word with the theories that I knew like long before, because I cannot like I'm thinking about the newer theory, because when I read your words, like, I apparently remember about some old theories. The first was the Vygotsky, that I the question first. So Vygotsky, and that I always remember that Vygotsky supports the learning language through the cultural context. So I always think about this concept because I think learning language is also will be beneficial, will be well imagined if it is related closely to a community, to a context, to a social interaction. So deciding for itself, I think, is one way of interacting with the social activity. And then also it relates to the anxiety also. So at first, I didn't really think about anxiety and self-confidence, about motivations when I am thinking about deciding poetry, but when I read your work, so I thought, yes, it is a possibility, and it is quite understandable if we put anxiety also here as part of the aspect that we will think when we give the students a poetry recitation memorizations, because this is in the way they are memorizing and reciting, there will be an emotional engagement, and then also the sense of accomplishment when they are finally can deliver and can recite the poetry. So it learned also a new term about environment building. So I try to relate it into the language classroom principles. So I'm thinking about on how this environment building, it can encourage personal connections of someone through a language. Because in the poetry itself, there is a context built, and it can connect the connections of someone with the language, because when they are provided with context, so implement the language into the practice instead of just um, memorizing a certain terms in English. It also allows the students to be curious and questions the meaning of each of the lines in the poetry itself. So in our words, we call it the inquiry-based learning. Of course, when we do it with a partner or in a group, it will lead to the group presentations and the peer feedback, which will allow us to have this what's so-called communicative language teaching, which is here. So I'm kind of afraid that I will make mistake when I go talking about CLD. All right, and then the last one is about people perspective, in which we are trying to we're trying to understand the poetic phrases, and if we ask the students to ask the students' point of view, like one by one, it might be different from one student to another. So yes, it will uh, promote the multiple perspectives that we'll gather through the group discussion.
Mbak Gir, you still
So
have
this,
1 minute left.
okay, thank you. So that was about the theory. So for the practicality, it will indeed, if reflect and implement, it can be implemented in some of our activities, as role play and group discussions. Those, and they can become a creative writer when they're trying to make poetry themselves. So here, to answer your questions, like about how it is outdated. Yes, it is outdated. When you just ask the students to remember, to memory what one word, certain terms, like the list of vocabulary. But because poetry provide the students with context, I don't think it is an outdated. It's a type of approach that we can include in our communicative language teaching, because integrating poetic recitations can support their pronunciations, fluency, and emotional expressions within the certain context. However, I think we should also face the challenge, because this can happen, but we have to make sure as a teacher that we will overcome the students' anxiety, because public sitting is not for everyone. And also we have to make sure that memorizations here is meaningful, that the students really trying to understand the meaningful, that we as a teacher try to lead them to have a meaningful memorizations and not just the mechanical one, not just asking them to uh, push their ability to think, their brain to remember about some meaningless sentences. So, is there a hand? Yes, but the memorizations and recitations promote context. So, it is related to context in ELT, and it will lead us to the cognitive, emotional, and cultural learning. So I think I will agree with your results in the paper, and hope to have a further discussions with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Pak Girindra. It's very amusing to listen to your talk about poetry memorization and also recitations from the perspective of English language teaching. And I really love the phrase, a hope of approach. So thanks very much, Mbak Gir. Now we will move to the second discussion. and it is Bapak Henrikus Joko Yulianto, PhD. Pak Henrikus, I hope is already here.
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Yes,
all right. Thank
thanks.
you.
Yeah.
Pak Henrikus currently is teaching at the English Literature Study Program, and his dissertation is also in poetry. So, Pak Henrikus, without any further ado, I am handing over my microphone to you, please.
Okay, thanks so much, Mbak Yani. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Wei-Kit Oyong. Yeah, nice to meet you. And this is very great. I mean, it's really good to have read your article. Very inspiring and very it's a brilliant idea. Yeah. So basically, I agree with what you have written in your article. Yeah, learning by heart as a pedagogy of hope, and this is really. I mean, like actually, memorization is not. It's not a new method. Yeah. What I remember that when I was in senior high school, junior high school, we used to memorize, yeah, all subjects, especially like social sciences. Yeah, so we used to do that. And I think in terms of poetry learning, this is also very suitable. Yeah. So in my comments now, actually, I don't point out some new ideas. Yeah. So I just want to share my experience as teaching staff at Universitas Negeri Semarang. So far, I have been assigned to teach in poetry classes. Yeah, Wicked. Yeah. So, and you know that in our department, yeah, this is, there are two programs, yeah, education and literature program. Yeah. So I'm in literature program. Yeah, because I did my undergrad, master, and PhD also in literature. Yeah. So I remember that when I was in undergrad, yeah, we were never taught, yeah, to memorize to memorize poems. Yeah. We were just asked to read, yeah, to read poems. Yeah. So our lecturers always give us several poems for reading. But we were never asked to memorize, yeah, to memorize them. Yeah. So what we had to do, yeah, we just try to give our interpretation, of course, yeah, what the general and detailed meaning of the poems, and then we try to analyze the intrinsic elements in the poems, yeah, things like that, yeah. So these are what I'm doing now, yeah, in my poetry classes. Yeah. So actually, after reading your article, yeah, I'm a little bit ashamed, yeah, ashamed of what I have done so far. Yeah. It seems that uh, students might not learn a lot, yeah, when with the way I deliver my lectures, yeah, my materials, yeah. So after reading your article, yes, I got like inspiration, and also like, yeah, so another time I might try to use memorization in my classes, yeah. So basically I agree with your idea, yeah, memorization is, so I think yes, like the old method, yeah, of learning, but might be a very great and relevant one at this present era when digital technology and AI, artificial intelligence, take command of all social sectors, including language and literary learning. Okay, please, next slide, Mbak. At this pleasant learning situation, especially in college, university level, gadgets or smartphones are indispensable device for most students. Their close attachment to this device has influenced their learning ways or their way of learning. They might rely on the device as the tool to get all the information they want to they want to seek, or they need, yeah, they need. And memorization will be a method. So this is, I agree with your idea, to bring students back to authentic way of learning, regardless of any technological intervention. Next slide, please. In my poetry class, I never ask students to memorize poems, but just ask them to read them aloud. One benefit of this learning is to train their pronunciation. Yes, I agree with the part that you said, that memorization will enhance students' pronunciation skill. Yeah, so I really agree that. Well, slightly helping them to understand the meaning of the poems. Then I introduce them poetic devices, such as imagery, figurative language, and the like, and ask them to identify these elements in the poems they have just read. So this is what my previous lecturers did. Then I just do the same, yeah, in my present poetry classes. This learning method might not really have them retain their memory of the lines of the poems, but at least it might evoke them to understand what the poem tells about. So like what I said, I just ask them to identify the general detailed meaning of the poems. Yeah. And then they will write the elements of the poems in an essay composed in introduction, body, and conclusion. First, they are asked to begin the paragraph with a thesis statement. And then second, they explain the statement with some supporting details. Okay. So I'm inspired by the list of themes in your article, yeah, sub-themes, codes, and code descriptions of learning poems by heart that you have described. I found this really comprehensive, yeah, including the aspects the students might develop in using memorization in their poetry learning. The aspects such as connecting, transforming, and perspective taking are the pivotal impacts that students might experience in their learning poems by heart. Okay. In my poetry classroom, students do not really experience these processes, yes, like what I told you before, yeah, because they just read the poems that I present very briefly. There's not yet enough time to read them closely and to immerse themselves in the content of the poems. Yeah, with only 90 minutes, we have only 90 minutes, yeah, for the lecturing time. Yeah, that I divide into 30 minutes for lecturing the topic, the next 30 minutes for discussing the poems and asking some students to read them, and the last 30 minutes for asking them to identify the general and detailed meaning of the poems. So it seems the time is not enough yet to have them memorize memorize the poems, but maybe I think we have to allocate the special time here for memorization. I think so. The other problem is that most of the students seem not to have a big interest in poetry. That's my different matter. Yeah. So they might enjoy listening to music, songs, rather than let's say reading or yeah, disappearing the meaning of poems. Yeah. But I think I have allocated more time for explaining the topic. This is a little bit theoretical stuff, yeah, rather than for having the students practice reading the poems and trying to develop their perspective of the poems. Yeah. But I really agree with your statement about envisionment building. Yeah. Uh, in my classes, I noticed that short classic, this is the materials, the kinds of poems that I'm used to giving, yeah, in my classes, yeah. So like I usually use romantic and post-romantics, yes, such as those of William Wordsworth, William Blake, and Emily Dickinson, yeah, are the best and most suitable reading texts for students, yeah. They might be possible to read and memorize them more quickly than to read longer poems. Yeah, for instance, Wordsworth poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, will be the best poem for memorization, yeah. So I think I myself memorized this only this stanza. Yeah. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Yeah. But the next poems, I don't really memorize them. Yeah, so I have to look again. So, but I think this is I think the best poems, yeah, for memorization, yeah, for memorizing, I think, yeah. Continues as the stars. Okay, next slide, please.
Pak Henrikus, sorry, you still have 1 minute left.
Yeah, okay,
Thank
Mbak.
you.
Thank you, Mbak. Yes. And then the next poem will be like William Blake, Sunflower. This is a brief poem, yeah, which consists only 2 stanzas. I think this is also good for memorizing, yeah. And the other poem is Emily Dickinson, yeah, like the poems like Success, Hope, and then Success, yeah, this is relatively short. Yeah, they might be also suitable for students to memorize, yeah. Okay, so in my conclusion, please show the conclusion, but the last PPT, yes. This is a sunflower, yeah. And then learning poetry by heart, especially through memorization, is a very appropriate method for poetry class in this present digital technology era. Like what Mr. Waikit has argued, this memorization enhances students' various skills, especially in their pronunciation, understanding the content of the poems, and their envisionment building. In my poetry classes, I will also try to adopt this method, yeah, to enhance students' skills in pronunciation, understanding, and in developing their visions. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Waikit, for very inspiring article.
All right. Thanks very much, Pak Henrikus, for
You're
sharing with
welcome.
us
You're
the way
welcome.
you conduct your poetry class using recitation, not memorization. But it's still worth noting for us this afternoon. Well, we move to the next discussion. Bapak Dani Buyung Yuda Prasetya MPD. So Pak Buyung, we call him Pak Buyung, has some research interests. The first one is on cognitive linguistics and then also in stylistics, but then both are in Japanese literature because he's teaching currently at the Japanese education study program. So Pak Buyung, without any further ado, the time is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Sumariani. Selamat siang, Bapak Ibu semuanya. Good afternoon, my kid. Izinkan saya ya untuk berbeda sendiri mungkin menggunakan bahasa Indonesia karena agar efisien. Jadi saya mencoba untuk mengaitkan penelitian yang dilakukan oleh Waikit Sensei dengan konteks pendidikan bahasa Jepang. Pada kami, dunia kami di pendidikan bahasa Jepang ini, saat ini dewasa ini tuh sedang seperti mengalami dilema ya Bapak Ibu. Atau mengalami kegamangan bahwa ada suatu paradigma bahwa ketika menghafal itu adalah sesuatu yang old fashion. Atau menghafal itu sesuatu yang outdated. Tetapi setelah saya mencoba membaca penelitian ini, ternyata mengubah perspektif bahwa melakukan kegiatan menghafal itu bukanlah sesuatu yang outdated ya. Meskipun di tengah disrupsi teknologi kayak saat ini ya, terutama di pendidikan bahasa Jepang tuh kami seakan-akan kejar untuk mencari sesuatu yang praktikal ya. Anak-anak diajarkan bagaimana problem solving project ya, atau menghasilkan sesuatu yang visionary dan praktikal. Dalam satu sisi dalam pendidikan bahasa Jepang tuh kami kesulitan. Sehingga ada suatu pandangan bahwa menghafal itu adalah sesuatu yang kaku, yang bersifat rutinitas, old fashion dan tidak kreatif. Tapi dalam penelitian ini ternyata membuktikan dalam konteks ya mempelajari puisi, proses ini dapat berfungsi sebagai alat yang efektif atau metode yang efektif untuk mengembangkan pemikiran yang lebih mendalam, refleksi kritis pada diri siswa. Pertama saya sedikit mengaitkan dengan pengalaman saya selama di industri. Saya merupakan insan industri kurang lebih 6 tahun, meskipun masih sebentar. Tapi saya melihat ya, ketika kita memandang bahwa jika memorization atau menghafal itu adalah sesuatu yang buruk, dan sebuah pengalaman itu adalah mengkoneksikan pengetahuan ya, experience itu mengoneksikan pengetahuan. Lalu kalau tidak ada yang kita pahami ya, atau tidak ada yang kita hafal itu bagaimana kita mau connecting the dots gitu. Jadi kita memahami bahwa pengalaman empiris dan teori adalah bagaimana kita menghubungkan satu titik dengan titik yang lain. Lalu jika kita sebut connecting the dots, maka akan muncul pertanyaan, jika tidak ada dot atau titik yang dimiliki, lalu lantas apa yang akan dihubungkan? Itu renungan saya ketika membaca ini dan melihat dari sisi pendidikan bahasa Jepang dan juga pengalaman saya di dunia industri. Karena kami seperti apa ya, ketakutan kalau pembelajaran itu bersifat menghafal itu adalah sesuatu yang buruk. Padahal di satu sisi, contoh soal saya dulu bekerja di perusahaan di bidang fiber, ketika pindah di bidang raw material itu saya harus menghafal banyak sekali kosakata, banyak sekali ungkapan-ungkapan. Karena itu adalah suatu dunia yang berbeda. Kalau dalam bahasa Jepang itu berpindah satu departemen bisnis itu adalah suatu dunia dunia yang berbeda. Tapi ternyata via pedagogi apa dengan menghafal ini dalam penelitian ini menghadirkan satu paradigma pedagogi yang baru. Ternyata menghafal itu tidak seperti yang saya ucapkan tadi yaitu old fashion dan kaku. Tapi setelah saya review ternyata kembali lagi ke bagaimana pedagogi itu dideliverikan atau diberikan di dalam kelas. Kemudian setelah saya membaca penelitian ini juga saya melihat beberapa manfaat ya. Mungkin bisa dimanfaat. Ya. Proses menghafal ini bukan sekedar mengingat kata-kata ya, tapi kita melibatkan pemahaman terhadap makna dan nuansa dalam setiap baris puisi. Dan kemudian penelitian ini lebih condong mengarah ke adanya pembentukan envisionment atau envisionment building ya. Jadi menciptakan hubungan yang lebih aktif dan reflektif terhadap teks atau yang membangun gambaran mental atau skema mental skema yang lebih kaya tentang tersebut, terutama mengaitkan pengalaman pribadi dan pengalaman dan makna-makna yang ada terkandung dalam puisi. Dan dalam kaitannya dengan linguistik kognitif itu ketika kita belajar memang eh, ada satu skema-skema cara pandang bagaimana mengungkapkan bahasa itu dalam psikologi kita. Dan dengan melalui recitation ini ya, memorization ini, ternyata dengan kita mendalami teks, mendalami puisi, muncul satu envisionment bahwa muncul skema-skema baru dalam siswa ya. Jadi mengaitkan pengalaman pribadi dengan makna-makna, dengan perspektif-perspektif baru sehingga memunculkan sudut pandang kritis, pola-pola pikir kritis. Karena dari satu sisi, ketika saya dulu di dunia korporasi juga saya tidak sedikit menemukan bahwa manajer-manajer saya adalah orang-orang sastra atau orang-orang humaniora. Karena ternyata cara mereka berkomunikasi, mendeliverikan suatu task atau suatu instruksi itu jauh lebih baik daripada, maaf, orang-orang teknik. Ya. Muncul skema-skema pengalaman mereka pinter untuk mengaitkan pengalaman. Nah itu didapat dari salah satu teorinya dan muncul dari hasil penelitian. Lalu juga manfaatnya adalah meningkatkan kepercayaan diri dan refleksi pribadi dari apa namanya ketika siswa itu dapat memahami, dapat menghafalkan, yang muncul rasa pencapaian dan rasa peningkatan percaya diri. Kemudian dan dari proses menghafal itu ternyata dipahami tidak hanya menghafal kata-kata saja, tapi juga merenungkan pesan yang lebih dalam dan emosi yang terkandung dan bagaimana sih seorang penyair itu memiliki teknik-teknik yang digunakan untuk menulis syair tersebut. Yang kelima adalah meningkatkan keterampilan verbal dan sosial. Dalam pendidikan bahasa Jepang mungkin tidak ada pembelajaran khusus ya mengenai apa namanya puisi karena dalam puisi bahasa Jepang itu ketika untuk memahami puisi itu diperlukan bahasa Jepang tingkat lanjut atas ya atau setara mungkin C1 ya. Maaf, C1 ya atau B2 ya. Nah, jadi apa namanya? Dalam mata kuliah eh, conversation pun mungkin kadang ada proses menghafal juga, yaitu to teks-teks seperti pidato, dan itu digunakan untuk mengembangkan tampilan verbal. Ada satu fenomena yang saya perhatikan 2 tahun ini, terutama ketika saya mengajar di Prodi Sastra Inggris. Pronunciation teman di Prodi Sastra Inggris pun jauh lebih baik daripada pronunciation mahasiswa pendidikan bahasa Jepang semester 1. Dia ternyata karena pembelajar bahasa Jepang semester 1 itu belum pernah mengengage terhadap apa namanya suatu pembelajaran verbal ya atau bahasa-bahasa yang lain, sehingga pengaruh bahasa ibunya itu sangat kental sekali. Justru ada teman-teman sastra Inggris ini melafalkan pronunciation bahasa Jepang malah lebih baik dalam konteks sama-sama beginner. Oke, lanjut. Pada tahapan saya pahami ya. Dari ketika tahapannya memang lebih fokus ke investment building ya. Meskipun step by step di sini saya pahami, saya lihat tidak rigid ya, karena bisa apa namanya back and forth ya. Tapi dengan bertemu atau encountering dengan PUM ya dan memorisasi itu muncul, saya lihat dari hasil penelitiannya adalah muncul apa namanya rasa penasaran dan curiosity ya. Lebih lagi ada involve ya, repeating, reading, citing, tapi menginternalisasi kosakata ini menambah mereka lebih memahami makna. Yang kemudian lah investment building ini, dia membuat mental image yang baru terhadap sebuah emosi, terhadap sebuah apa ya, skenario atau ide-ide dalam puisi tersebut. Jadi menghafal ternyata tidak hanya sebatas menghafal saja di sini disajikan, tapi membangun suatu skema baru di dalam mental psikologi siswa terhadap pengalaman-pengalaman, mengkoneksikan berbagai hal sehingga mereka dapat berpikir kritis ya dan merefleksikan dan menginterpretasikan hal yang baru. Yang kemudian adalah melalui investment building ini tujuannya muncul yaitu personal growth atau suatu development di dalam diri siswa. Jadi secara umum dipahami bahwa eh, memorisasi bukanlah sesuatu yang outdated, tapi tergantung bagaimana kita engage atau mendelivery dalam sebuah pedagogi. Karena kembali lagi kalau tidak ada sesuatu yang dihafal atau suatu atau dots-nya itu, lalu bagaimana kita akan mengkoneksikan dots tersebut. Kira-kira seperti itu. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Pak Buyung. So before I jump into the next discussion, I'd like to give or mention several points from Pak Buyung's presentation. So the first thing that he mentioned is on how your article, Waikit, shed some light to him on how he had a new perspective in seeing memorization and also recitation. Because in the realm of Japanese teaching itself, memorization and also recitation are still seen as something outdated, an outdated method. Therefore, when he saw and read your article, it gave him some sort of like enlightenment that we need to see this practice as a sort of two-way communication. He furthermore mentioned on how when he worked for a Japanese company, he found that a lot of his managers back then were from the literary departments, graduates from the literary department. So yeah, somehow it has proven some points that learning literary works and also memorization and also recitation that they got in class could shed some light and also build a good two-way communication. And furthermore, to close his message, he has already stated about the envisionment building that you also mentioned in your article. So yeah, that's the summary. Hopefully it helps at least the beginning part of his presentation. Oke, Pak
Thank you so
Buyung.
much. Terima kasih.
Oke, sama-sama, Waikit. Now we move to the fourth presenter or discussant. Now I'd like to invite Ibu Korota Ayu Neina, MPD. So she's currently teaching at the Indonesian language department or study program, sorry, Indonesian language education study program. And she has research interests in evaluation and also literary teaching. So without any further ado, Bu Neina, the time is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Yani. Good afternoon, Mr. Waikit. Salam kenal. Baik, izinkan saya untuk berbagi layar terlebih dahulu. Baik, selamat siang. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Izinkan di sini saya sedikit mereview begitu ya, sama seperti dengan teman-teman yang lain kaitannya dengan artikel yang sudah ditulis oleh Mr. Waikit Oyong terkait dengan pembelajaran puisi dengan menghafal. Jadi saya akan memulai review ini dari sebuah cerita ya, Mr. Waikit. Ketika saya kuliah dulu, ketika saya belajar di S1, saya memiliki seorang teman ya. Dia itu adalah seorang pembaca puisi. She is the queen of poem ya. Jadi dia adalah ratunya pembaca puisi gitu. Jadi ketika awal saya pertama kali bertemu dengan dia ya, dia membacakan sebuah puisi yang sangat terkenal di Indonesia. Judulnya adalah Kucing ya, ditulis oleh salah satu sastrawan yang sangat terkenal juga di Indonesia. Nah, ketika teman saya ya, sebut saja Mawar, dia membacakan puisinya, dia sangat menjiwai ya. Dia menghafal tiap kata gitu ya, sangat rinci, sangat detail, padahal puisinya sangat panjang begitu. Nah, kemudian saya masih berusaha untuk apa ya, mencerna sebetulnya kenapa sih kalau di Indonesia itu dalam lomba-lomba pembacaan puisi itu harus dihafal begitu. Nah, padahal tadi sudah disebutkan juga oleh Pak Henrikus begitu ya, dan juga Pak Buyung kaitannya bahwa metode menghafal itu kalau di dalam ranah kognitif ya, itu dianggap adalah metode yang paling rendah ya, disebutnya ranah kognitif Bloom yang sudah direvisi oleh Anderson itu ranah mengingat ya, itu merupakan ranah paling rendah, ranah C1. Padahal kalau kita kaitkan dengan kemampuan abad atau keterampilan abad 21 yang menuntut pelajar itu untuk berpikir kritis ya, itu pasti pengennya itu ya kemampuan berpikir itu mulai dari C4, C5, C6 ya, mulai dari menganalisis, kemudian mengevaluasi dan berkreasi. Nah, kemudian saya juga menemukan gitu ya satu sisi kehidupan teman saya yang The Queen of Poem tadi ya. Jadi dia itu adalah lulus dengan predikat mahasiswa terbaik ya pada waktu itu di angkatan saya. Dia juga memiliki pemikiran yang lebih dewasa dan dia lebih visioner dibandingkan teman-temannya. Dia lulus terlebih dahulu, karya-karyanya itu juga bagus begitu dan memiliki penalaran yang lebih tinggi dibanding teman-temannya. Saya juga agak heran kenapa dia bisa berbeda dengan teman-temannya. Artinya lebih unggul begitu. Nah, ketika saya membaca ya artikel milik Mr. Waikit ini kemudian saya menemukan jawabannya gitu. Jadi seseorang itu dapat merasakan transformasi batin gitu ya. Jadi ketika dia diajarkan belajar puisi ya dengan menghafal itu, hal tersebut mengajari teman saya itu bahwa keindahan kata kita itu bisa membuka cakrawala baru gitu ya dalam pikirannya. Nah, melalui artikel dari Pak Waikit ini saya menemukan ada 5 poin penting yang kemudian menyadarkan saya bahwa ternyata menghafal puisi itu bukan sesuatu yang out of date gitu ya. Kesadaran ini juga muncul sama seperti Pak Buyung gitu. Kesadaran ini muncul ketika saya mulai mendalami ini artikel dari Mr. Waikit Learning by Heart as a Pedagogy of Hope gitu. Nah, Poin pertama yang saya sadari bahwa menghafal puisi itu bisa meningkatkan repositori pengetahuan internal gitu. Ketika seseorang gitu ya menghafal sesuatu, informasi tersebut akan masuk ke dalam ingatan dan itu menjadi bagian dari pengetahuan gitu ya yang ada di dalam otak kita. Nah, dalam konteks ini tadi kalau Pak Buyung menyebutnya adalah connecting the dots gitu ya. Jadi proses menghafal puisi itu bisa membantu seseorang untuk apa ya lebih merenung dan merefleksikan apa yang kemudian dia baca. Nah, uh, akan ada ya connecting atau perubahan cara berpikir yang mendalam. Jadi ketika siswa itu menghabiskan waktu menghafal, dia tidak hanya sekedar memasukkan kata-kata saja, tetapi justru dia bisa menghargai puisi itu secara utuh. Dia menemukan makna secara tersembunyi dan tidak hanya membaca sebatas permukaan saja, begitu. Nah, kemudian jawaban kedua gitu ya yang saya dapatkan juga dari artikel ini bahwa ketika menghafal puisi itu seseorang bisa merasakan transformasi batin. Yang di dalam proses transformasi batin ini itu bisa mengajarkan bahwa keindahan kata-kata dalam puisi itu bisa membuka cakrawala baru gitu ya dalam pikirannya. Jadi eh, kata-kata transformasi batin ini saya ambil dari ini ya Mr. Oyong yang saya memaknainya itu bahwa ketika kita gitu ya mengalami perubahan besar dalam hati kemudian pikiran saat kita tuh tenggelam dalam keindahan dan juga memaknai puisi ya. Jadi kata-kata indah, kemudian iramanya, perumpamaannya, kemudian simbol-simbol yang ada di dalam puisi itu mendorong siswa, dalam konteks ini ya siswa untuk berpikir lebih dalam. Justru yang awalnya itu hanya sekedar memorizing gitu ya, dia akan menyelam gitu ya untuk berpikir lebih dalam, berpikir lebih kritis ya, melihat dunia dari sudut pandang yang berbeda. Nah, proses ini bagaikan membuka jendela baru ya dalam pikiran sehingga kita bisa mendapatkan pemahaman dan wawasan yang lebih luas tentang nilai-nilai yang ada di dalam puisi diajarkan dalam puisi tersebut. Kemudian poin ketiga yang saya dapatkan dari membaca artikel ini bahwa memorizing ya, jadi menghafal puisi itu ya, kita bisa menyebutnya adalah belajar puisi dengan hati ya, learning with the heart gitu, sesuai dengan judul. Ini diusulkan sebagai sebuah pedagogi harapan ya. Istilah pedagogi harapan ini indah ya ya. Jadi melawan saya katakan melawan gagasan pendidikan. Jadi seolah-olah kita itu sekolah hanya untuk mendapatkan nilai gitu ya. Nah, gagasan dari Mr. Oyong ini sengaja untuk mendobrak gitu ya, mendobrak gagasan tersebut bahwa belajar puisi dengan hati itu ya itu tidak hanya sekedar kita belajar di sekolah untuk mendapatkan skor aja, untuk mendapatkan nilai aja untuk persiapan ujian belaka gitu. Nah, jadi ketika kita belajar puisi dengan hati ya, kita itu diajak untuk eh, merasakan gitu ya dan juga menghayati puisi itu secara mendalam. Jadi bukan hanya menghafal atau mempelajari untuk nilai ujian tadi ya. Jadi pendekatan ini bisa mendorong guru dan juga siswa untuk melihat puisi itu sebagai sumber inspirasi ya dan juga membuka cara pandang baru begitu. Jadi pendidikan itu tidak hanya sekedar persiapan untuk menghadapi ujian saja, tetapi juga tentang menumbuhkan semangat, gitu ya, kreativitas dan juga pemahaman yang lebih luas tentunya ketika kita melihat kehidupan gitu. Jadi kenapa teman saya lebih visioner ya? Ketemulah ini ya jawabannya di sini. Kemudian ketika kita menghafal ya puisi ini juga kita bisa membangun sebuah visi gitu. Nah, membangun visi ini saya menggambarkan sebagai proses yang melampaui pemahaman teks gitu. Jadi berfokus pada keterlibatan hidup kita itu dengan sastra, keingintahuan, kemudian kolaborasi berbagai perspektif gitu ya. Nah, kita bisa mengartikan bahwa ketika kita terus menjaga rasa ingin tahu gitu ya dan kita terbuka terhadap berbagai sudut pandang, dengan cara ini sastra dalam konteks ini puisi ya, itu bisa menjadi sebuah inspirasi dan memperluas pemahaman kita dan cara pandang kita terhadap dunia. Dan kemudian yang terakhir nih ya, menghafal puisi itu dalam pemahaman saya ya, itu dapat meningkatkan kemampuan aktif siswa gitu ya dalam membuat indera, membangun koneksi dan juga mengambil perspektif. Jadi bisa dikatakan misalnya kita ya ketika memorizing puisi itu kita juga seperti mendengarkan iramanya gitu ya, membayangkan gambarnya, uh, visionnya seperti apa, merasakan emosi yang terkandung di dalam bait-bait tersebut gitu. Jadi ketika menghafal, siswa itu dapat mengaitkan ide-ide dalam puisi dengan pengalaman pribadi gitu. Jadi kalau misalnya kita mendengar bait ya, puisi Hairil Anwar misalnya, aku ini binatang jalang, nah gitu ya. Kemudian proses menghafal ini membuat inderanya jadi lebih tajam. Bukan berarti dia menjadi sebuah binatang gitu ya, seekor binatang tidak, tapi lebih kepada dia mendengar irama tersebut, kemudian merasakan getaran emosi di dalamnya gitu ya, dan mengaitkan maknanya. Jadi binatang jalang itu bisa dimaknai seperti keinginan ya untuk berani menghadapi tantangan. Oke, mungkin itu ya 5 hal yang kemudian bisa saya ambil dari Mr. Waikit dan sangat positif sekali dan akhirnya ya terbuka juga pemikiran saya bahwa menghafal puisi itu tidak hanya sekedar C1 aja nih, justru yang diawali C1 ini kemudian kita bisa mengembangkan sebuah pemikiran kritis menjadi C6. Oke, terima kasih, itu yang bisa saya sampaikan. Thank you, terima kasih Mr. Waikit.
Thanks very much, Bu Neina. So Bu Neina has tried to connect this memorization and also recitation technique at first with Bloom's taxonomy. In Bloom's taxonomy, probably it's on C1, so it's on the lower level. But then if we take a look at it deeper, we could find that it can trigger several benefits for the students. 5 of them have been mentioned by Bunena, such as a deep understanding and also inner transformation, learning with the heart, vision building, and also ignite students' sensitivity. One thing that is also interesting to be mentioned here is on how she pointed out that your article, Waikit, can be positioned as like a question towards the perspective that is widely used in Indonesian teaching and learning process, because most of teachers here in Indonesia are still using are consider that the use of recitation and also memorization as an outdated method. So your article is considered as a radical perspective from the point of view of most teachers here. So that's the summing up of her presentation. Hopefully it helps. Now I'd like to call the last discussion for today's discussion session before later we move to Waikit as the main discussion. So I would like to invite Dr. Nur Hanifah Isnani. So Dr. Hanifah is currently teaching at the Japanese language education study program. And she has research interests in teaching and learning technology and also Japanese letters. It's quite complicated, it seems, Japanese letters, because I myself cannot write it well in Japanese letters. So Bu Hanifah, without any further ado, the time is yours.
Thank you, Bu Yani. Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mr. Waikit, salam kenal. Nice to meet you. I'm Hanifah. Maybe it's a unique comparison because I am from Japanese educational study program, and I should saya harus membedah kemudian puisi dalam bahasa Inggris yang kemudian perlu disesuaikan dengan bahasa Jawa begitu. Tetapi dari kemudian artikel yang sudah ditulis oleh Weikit begitu, ada sesuatu yang menarik yang kemudian bisa saya coba cari benang merahnya, bagaimana kemudian penerapan learning by heart that you have write in your article dapat kemudian diterapkan dalam proses pembelajaran bahasa Jawa. Di dalam pembelajaran bahasa Jawa sendiri sebenarnya konsep puisi ini tidak kemudian gambarannya sebatas seperti puisi-puisi modern saja. Tetapi di dalam pembelajaran bahasa Jawa, kajian puisi ini ada yang namanya puisi tradisional Jawa, traditional Javanese poetry in Javanese, yang kemudian disebut dengan tembang. Yang kebanyakan kemudian terkenal dengan tembang mocopat seperti itu. Sehingga sebenarnya tembang mocopat sendiri merupakan bagian dari puisi, tetapi dalam bentuk puisi tradisional Jawa yang klasik. Nah, hari ini saya coba akan membedah terkait discovering the soft truth tembang mocopat, that how this the learning by heart can integrating learning in Javanese educational program with and the relationship with Ki Hajar Dewantara's educational philosophy. Next, Mbak. Di dalam artikel yang ditulis Weikit ada hal yang menarik yang kemudian saya soroti, khususnya terkait pembelajaran dengan hati. Nah, ketika saya mendengar istilah learning by heart, satu yang kemudian saya remember adalah salah satu tokoh pendidikan di Indonesia, yaitu Ki Hajar Dewantara, yang juga kemudian menekankan proses pembelajaran dengan konsep memanusiakan manusia, yang kemudian tercermin dalam filosofi yang terkenal di Indonesia, yaitu ing ngarsa sung tulodo, ing madya mangun karso, dan tuturi handayani. Konsep ini sebenarnya selaras dengan konsep learning by heart yang kemudian sudah dituliskan oleh Weikit dalam pembedahannya dalam pembelajaran puisi, karena konsep belajar dengan hati ini kemudian dapat membangun terciptanya penumbuhan cipta, rasa, dan karsa dalam proses belajar. Sehingga pendidikan dan proses pembelajaran itu sendiri bukan hanya kemudian menjadi sekedar transfer ilmu saja, tetapi juga dapat menjadi landasan pijakan untuk membentuk nilai-nilai kepribadian siswa. Nah, learning by heart yang kemudian bukan sekedar menghafal secara mekanis atau secara mekanis ini kemudian melibatkan keterlibatan emosional dan refleksi yang mendalam untuk membahas sebuah isi teks. Nah, hal inilah yang kemudian menjadi hal yang sama kemudian dengan karakter pemahaman pendidikan, bagaimana belajar dengan mengutamakan cipta, rasa, dan karsa sendiri. Kenapa? Karena memang belajar dengan hati ini dapat meningkatkan daya ingat siswa, begitu, kemudian memperkuat kondisi emosional, memperkuat koneksi emosional siswa dengan teks, sehingga siswa ini akan lebih mudah memahami makna dari teks yang kemudian ia baca. Dan ketika koneksi emosional dengan teks ini sudah tercapai, maka kemudian dapat membuat siswa lebih mudah untuk merefleksikan dirinya, sehingga siswa kemudian dapat berlatih untuk mencoba mengaitkan makna puisi, termasuk juga makna tembang, begitu di dalam proses kehidupan pribadi mereka. Oke, selanjutnya Mbak. Nah, ini adalah kemudian gambaran bagaimana konsep filosofi pendidikan Ki Hajar Dewantara yang kemudian related dengan konsep learning by heart yang sudah ditulis oleh Weikit. Yang pertama terkait pemunculan proses cipta, rasa, karsa. Cipta sendiri merupakan proses berpikir dan proses memahami makna puisi. Kemudian rasa di sini adalah proses untuk menginternalisasikan bagaimana emosi dan nilai-nilai yang kemudian terkandung di dalam puisi dalam kehidupan sehari-hari, kemudian karsa adalah bentuk pengaplikasian dari nilai moral atau kemudian esensi dari puisi atau tembang dalam proses kehidupan sehari-hari. Begitu. Hal inilah yang kemudian perlu dipahami oleh guru sehingga guru ini dapat mengoptimalkan perannya seperti filosofi Tuturi Handayani bahwasanya guru ini bukan hanya sekedar mengajar tetapi juga membimbing siswa untuk bisa menemukan pemahaman mereka sendiri melalui teks puisi. Pada akhirnya goal untuk penciptaan pendidikan karakter yang kemudian pendidikan sendiri bukan hanya sekedar penyampaian ilmu tetapi juga dapat membentuk moral dan nilai kehidupan individu yang lebih baik begitu sehingga baik puisi modern atau kemudian puisi tradisional seperti tembang mocopat dapat kemudian menjadi media yang efektif untuk menanamkan karakter berbasis budaya. Boleh lanjut? Nah, Wikit ini adalah salah satu bait saja yang kemudian saya ambil sebagai gambaran di dalam teks bahasa Jawa yang diambil dari manuskrip aksara Jawa dari Selat Wurangreh. Ini adalah salah satu petikan bait tembang gambuh. Begitu saya coba bacakan. Sebenarnya kalau di dalam bahasa Jawa cara membaca traditional poetry itu dengan dilagukan, dengan ada nadanya begitu. Saya coba bacakan sedikit. Semoga tidak fals. Sekar kambuh ping catur kang cinatur pola kang kalantur tanpa tutur katulo-tulo katali kadaluar kapatuh katutuh pantati awon. Nah, itu tadi cara membaca puisi di dalam tembang mocopat yang sekaligus menjadi traditional poetry in Japanese seperti itu. Nah, ketika belajar dengan hati yang kemudian mencoba untuk menghafalkan kata baik kata dari tembang ini tentu saja akan membuat siswa lebih mudah untuk memaknai pesan yang ada di dalam tembang mocopat ini begitu. Satu persatu katanya kemudian bisa diresapi, yang kemudian bisa direfleksikan pada dirinya, sehingga bisa menuntun dirinya pada jalan yang benar. Tembang gambuh yang saya bacakan tadi kira-kira memiliki makna filosofis terkait pentingnya bimbingan moral, bahwasanya tanpa arahan yang benar, seseorang ini bisa bertindak tanpa kendali bahwasanya kebiasaan buruk yang kemudian terus dilakukan itu akan dan tidak difikirkan dengan matang akan berdampak negatif. Oleh karena itu, esensi dari tembang ini kemudian bisa digunakan agar siswa tidak terjebak dalam kebiasaan yang salah. Next. Nah, kemudian untuk penerapan learning by heart dalam pembelajaran tembang mocopat sendiri, kira-kira kemudian yang bisa dilakukan adalah ada 3 tahapan, yaitu yang pertama melalui proses internalization dan reflection, bahwasanya di sini siswa itu dimulai dengan diminta untuk menghubungkan makna tembang dengan pengalaman pribadi, kemudian diminta untuk envisionment building atau membangun imajinasi dan pemahaman kontekstual untuk menginterpretasi tembang, kemudian menganalisis relevansi isinya dengan kehidupan saat ini, dan diakhiri dengan proses collaborative learning dengan membaca, menyanyikan tembang dalam kelompok, sehingga proses pembelajarannya akan lebih menyenangkan dan lebih efektif kan karena memang siswa akan mencoba menghafal tetapi esensinya tidak hanya sekedar menghafal tetapi lebih bagaimana siswa mampu memahami dan menginternalisasikan nilai-nilai tembang itu sendiri. Next. Nah, inilah yang kemudian menjadi akhir goal dari proses learning by heart terhadap kaitannya dengan pembentukan jati diri siswa, bahwasanya learning by heart ini memiliki hal positif untuk meningkatkan kesadaran diri siswa, untuk bisa menanamkan nilai-nilai kebijaksanaan serta menghubungkan pembelajaran dengan kehidupan nyata. Akhir, kesimpulannya bahwasanya learning by heart ini adalah metode pembelajaran yang tidak hanya berfokus pada hafalan, tetapi saya menggarisbawahi sebagai proses pemahaman mendalam pada isi teks yang kemudian dapat menjadi jembatan untuk merefleksikan diri pribadi peserta didik. Mungkin itu yang bisa saya sampaikan. Thank you for your attention. Saya kembalikan kepada moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thanks, Dr. Hanifah, for presenting your interesting presentation. So it's basically talking about how learning by heart is closely related to an educational vision proposed by one of our education figures, Ki Hajar Dewantoro. So his approach is very humanistic in understanding things and also surroundings. And one of the application of this humanistic perspective is through the learning and also analysis of Javanese poetry, which we call as tembang. Tembang, the correct way of reading tembang is by reciting it through songs. So it needs to be positioned as a song. So therefore, you saw how Dr. Hanifah previously sang this particular poem. And, by doing some analysis on this Javanese poetry, the process can, make students get used to what we call as the development of their character building. So slowly but sure, they're going to, the goal that has been proposed by Ki Hajar Dewantoro, being a humanistic person or people with humanistic perspective. So that's basically the summing up. Hopefully it also helps. And now I think it will be your turn, Waikit, to give your comments. But before that, I think I need to read your biography to all the participants and also audience. So for those who haven't known him, I'm going to read his biography. So Oyong Waikit is an educator and also PhD candidate at the English Language and Literature Academic Group, National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. So his doctoral research explores how learning poetry by heart contributes to envisionment building in the English or literature classroom. He has taught English literature and English language for several years at the high school level and served in the Singapore Ministry of Education headquarters. His writings have been featured in the Quarterly Literary Review of Singapore, Tiger Moth Review, and elsewhere. He holds a master's degree in English from University College London, where he was awarded the John Oliver Hopes Memorial Scholarship in Modern English. Wow. An editor of 4 poetry anthologies, he has served as a judge of the National Poetry Competition organized by Poetry Festival Singapore. And in 2019, he was presented the Outstanding Youth in Education Award by the Singapore Ministry of Education. Wow, what a biography. So, Waikid, the time is yours.
Thank you, Yani. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Crystal clear.
Thank you so much, Yani. Thank you, everyone. I should learn from how everyone is so adept in languages here. Assalamualaikum, selamat siang, salam kenal, right? I'm learning all these phrases. Please correct me if I'm wrong anywhere. Right? I'm so touched and heartened and impressed, right, by how all of you, right, faculty and students and all have prepared such detailed and thoughtful responses to my research topic here. So this to me is really something, and I'm very grateful. So yes, hi everyone, I'm Waikit, right, as Yani introduced, and here's acknowledging my funding source. I'm just supposed to mention this, and as mentioned, my presentation is entitled Learning by Heart, Envisionment Building Through Memorization and Recitation of Poetry, right? And essentially what I'm doing is to explore, right, as all of you have recounted so masterfully as well, right? I'm looking at how this practice of learning poetry by heart can possibly help students to deepen their relationships with poems. And in the process, how that journey can shape their understanding of text of themselves and of the process of learning itself. So I would just like to start by honoring your university and your faculty, right? And so just a shout out also to, I really love this poem. I just had to add it, right? That Prof. Fuji, like when you mentioned this, that was to me very striking, right? That every line is so dense with meaning. Like when I'm here in its native tongue, right? That when you're reciting and performing that poem Silence, right? And I just thought that was a perfect example. And that really echoes the points raised by all your presentations of all discussants, I mean, of Tembang and so on. So I'm really, really struck a chord with me. So thank you, right, to your whole team for this. So the article, which you have literally seen this like 6 times, so I'm not going to belabor the point, right? But just to mention that the details are here, so I'm just going to move on into the behind the scenes process, right? I just thought it would be interesting to share that process behind the findings that the study foregrounds. So here's an outline of my presentation. I'll first offer a brief introduction and background, the research context, the literature review, including the theoretical framework, the methodology and study design, findings and discussion, right? And before we conclude. So due to time constraints, I'm going to be zooming through most of the earlier sections so that we can have more time for the later sections and Q&A as well. And we can return to any slide. If at any point I'm going too fast, please feel free to let me know in the chat. I'm happy to share slides, go back and so on. So first, what's the background and history of learning poetry by heart and why might it be important today? Just a really brief note about definitions, right? We know what's poetry, right? But what about memorization? I mean, we talked about it literally for the past like 1.5 hours, right? So what I'm suggesting is that if we look at it etymologically, we look at the words, to memorize means to retain, right? To retain these informational inputs, whereas to recite or to perform is to produce behavioral outputs. So that directional aspect is helpful to note. And even the phrase by heart, right? If we look at the phrase in English, the phrase by heart is related etymologically to the Latin verb meaning to recollect, okay, which in turn derives from the Latin word core meaning heart, right? So when we say learn by heart, it's not just rote memorization, right? There's some degree of emotional investment, right? Of taking the words into the very core of our being, right? And if we compare that to by rote, right? When we say rote learning or learning by rote, that if we look at the word, the word rote stems from the Latin rota, meaning a wheel, like in the sense of a torture device in medieval Europe, right? And when we say learn by rote, it's to memorize mechanically, right? Without understanding. So evidently, there's a very clear difference between these two. And what we're striving for students to do is not to learn by rote. That is not what I'm saying. I'm suggesting learning by heart can be helpful if practiced right. And so now let's take a trip back in time, all right? Let's go back a few hundred years and let's imagine we are in the 19th, 20th centuries, right? During which poetry memorization was popular, right? Due to economic circumstances, right? And it was also a source of moral edification, meaning it was a means to build character, right? And interestingly, right, it was when we say memorizing poetry, right, that was tied to assessment and funding for schools in the West, right? So in England, in America, schools would get $1 a pupil if the students could recite a poem. Like, so they would get $1 if it was fair, they would get 2 shillings if it was good. That was how it was. I mean, that's the system where the background context. Now, if we go even further back in time, right? Let's go thousands of years ago, right? Actually, since antiquity, in virtually all societies, right, that commitment to memory of massive bodies of text, of memorizing like vast amounts of poetry, that was routine, right? And we see that commitment to memorization, whether it's in Aboriginal Australia, whether it's in medieval Europe, whether it's in the Islamic or the Chinese traditions, we see that kind of commitment to poetry by heart. And I'm pleased to learn about Javanese tembang as well. I mean, clearly there is that universality about this, right? I definitely want to bring that into my research too. So now, then let's go back. Okay, instead of antiquity and the 19th to 20th centuries, let's now hit to the mid-20th century, okay? So what happened? Essentially, learning poetry by heart or memorizing fell out of fashion, right? As we all observed, it's outdated. But why, right? So essentially, there could be two reasons, right? One is that the entire educational systems, all the entire educational system has changed. That it has been labeled as rote learning for all subjects, not just for English or for languages, right? And also, if we see certain literary movements like the new critics, of course, right? Their rise meant that we focus on close reading, on analyzing text, and not on performing or enjoying text. So it's a very different orientation towards the text, right? And we can see that difference between these two stances, right? So on the one hand, you have memorization, which harnesses the poem as a source of inspiration, right? In terms of what a poem is, right? Which is different from practical criticism, which is when the poem is an object for analysis and dissection, right? When we study the poem in class, right? We look at how the poem operates in terms of how it achieves its intended effects, right? And that dominance of this analytical approach, right, just means it has meant that the memorized poem has all but disappeared, right, in most contemporary classrooms. So now let's skip forward. Okay, let's go to the present, meaning 21st century. And what we notice is quite interesting, that from the 2000s onwards, right, interest in the memorized poem has revived for some strange reason, right? Now we see new anthologies of poems. Yeah, I'm just looking just at poetry in English alone, even just to see this first. Perhaps in other languages too, but in poetry, as for poetry in English, there are new anthologies, there are apps you can use to learn by heart. There are poetry recitation competitions. There's a photo of that, of the one in the UK, Poetry by Heart, right? There's one in Singapore now, the National Poetry Recitation Competition. So why, right? Why this sudden interest? And I suggest this could be due to a nostalgic impulse at work, as has been commented in the literature. Perhaps all of these initiatives indicate some renewed interest in instilling the joy of poetry through learning by heart, right? And far from signaling rote learning, it's a means to connect with a broader discourse community. So, at this point, we can directly address the question of motivation, right? So why on earth would students still learn poetry by heart, right? As your discussants have rightly pointed out, students are far more interested in their screens today. They'll be watching shows, they'll be listening to music. Why poetry, right? And why poetry by heart? So what I did, essentially, to cut a long story short, is to look at all the journal articles out there that have talked about poetry by heart. And then I went to sequence them, analyze them, classify them, right? And distill the essential points, right? To broadly categorize some of these reasons. And what I'm seeing is that there are intellectual motivations, so meaning in terms of how it can help the mind, but also social emotional motivations, right? That is something about the heart. So in brief, there's cognitive stimulation, right, which can improve communication skills. There's accessibility. So when you learn a poem by heart, literally no one can take it away from you. Like you just know it. It's just like how Nelson Mandela was reciting poems to himself by heart when he was imprisoned in South Africa, because no one could take that away from him, right? Even though he was a prisoner. And then thirdly, ownership, because once you know a poem inside out, you literally have it in you, right? And then fourthly, as an aid to performance, it's like how Prof. Puji just now was performing that poem, for example, right? Or when, with the performance of Tembang, for example. There's something that's touching. And also lifelong recitation through the maturation of the reader. Something about growing with a poem. That poem grows with us too. It grows inside us as well, right? So just moving quickly along, right? I'm just mindful of time. In terms of the research context, why explore the learning of poetry by heart in Singapore secondary school literature classrooms? Okay, I'm just going to skip some of these major points after this, but in brief, what I suggest is a research gap here, right? That what we see is that the memorized poem has been studied in a very limited way in the UK and the US, but not in the broader Anglosphere, in the broader English-speaking world beyond that. So that's what I'm looking at. That will shed light on the broader English-speaking world. And more crucially, there are pedagogical implications. So if poetry by heart, as the experts tell us, is so good for us, why is it we don't do this in classrooms anymore, right? So if we can bring this back, how can we bring this back? How can it be made relevant again for students today? That's what we're looking at, right? And that's why my research questions here, as mentioned in the article as well, would be these, right? So essentially, when we look at adolescents, right? And why adolescents? Because they are the students who have just encountered poetry, often, right? Complex poetry. And how do they journey with a poem, right? How does it contribute to, I'll get to this in a minute, to their envisionment building? And also, what might a model look like? That means if we think of a theoretical model, right, that's influenced by the practice, right? So how could that model help guide, what might a model look like that would help to guide our literature teachers such that they can incorporate some form, modified form of poetry by heart in the contemporary classroom? Okay, so in brief, why the Singapore context? I'm looking at the Singapore context, not just because I'm here, but because briefly, firstly, language. So it's a broadly English-speaking population. It's easier to conduct research like that in the same language as compared to the UK and US. So there is a basis for comparison. Secondly, in our syllabus here, in the English syllabus here, there is an increased emphasis on poetry. And thirdly, it also mirrors trends in the literary arts. There's a burgeoning interest in poetry memorization, even here in Singapore. Okay, and if just to speak through this about the Singapore context, I'm keeping the broader context in mind, that if you look at the 1980s in Singapore, when English language became a separate subject for English literature. And that's very important because it means that the assessment is different and assessment drives pedagogy, right? And then we looked at the 90s, literature enrollment fell. I mean, I'm wondering, what's it like in Indonesia for you? I mean, like is literature enrollment, meaning studies in literature and language, falling, or what's the trend like? Because in Singapore, it certainly has. I mean, so maths and science is now, of course, in fashion, right? But then if we move forward in the next few decades, right, we see the analytical impulse. Again, what we mentioned about the new critics just now, the analytical impulse has again filtered through in the study of literature. And then likewise, now we see this turn towards poetry, right? But then again, poetry lessons are still often taught perfunctorily, just as a matter of course. Oh yeah, we need to get a poem over and done with, for example, right? Especially at the lower secondary level, meaning just like grades 7 and 8, like 12, 13-year-olds. So how can we make poetry fun and interesting again, is our question, right? And okay, so briefly, what's the theoretical framework? I mentioned envisionment building. So what do we mean by an envisionment? I mean, it's a big word, right? And as your discussants have rightly pointed out, that's based on Judith Langer's envisionment building approach, right? So what Judith Langer suggests is that an envisionment is essentially a text world in the mind, right? So every time we read something, say we encounter the poem Silence, like from just now, right? So we've got one reading. So that's a new idea. There's a new thought and a new feeling we have. That's one impression. Then we read it again, and we read it again, and so on and so forth, until that envisionment, in other words, that text world in our mind, becomes enriched over time, right? So what she describes it is meaning and motion, right? That's a sense of enrichment. And that's what we want for students, right? For their text worlds to become enriched. And Langer actually goes into a lot of detail about this, right? But I'm just going to summarize and just draw out relevant sections. So she goes into these 4 principles of practice, right? That of students are lifelong envisionment builders. She promotes questioning. Class is a safe space to test our ideas and multiple perspectives for interpretation. But the point here is, why is this theoretical framework helpful? Because it's also incorporates the affective dimensions, right, of readers' experiences. It's about the emotions, right? That when we read a text, it's like we're embarking on a reconnaissance mission. It's like we're a spy, right? We are investigating our way to a text, right? We're exploring horizons of possibilities. It's an adventure. It's something new. There are emotions of wonder and discovery. How can we bring that back again for students? That's something crucial. And that's why I'm suggesting there's a rationale for envisionment building. If we look at our syllabus in Singapore in English, there is a direct one-to-one correspondence with Langer's theory. And that's why I'm suggesting it's helpful for this study too. Okay, in terms of promoting empathetic and global thinkers, critical readers, creative meaning makers, convincing communicators. Yeah, okay, just moving forward quickly. Methodology and study design, what's the program overview, methodology and design of the study. So what do we do then in that case? So what I did was, since I also I'm the main organizer of this poetry, National Poetry Recitation Competition in Singapore, right? As part of Poetry Festival Singapore, okay, which is held every year, I decided I would also conduct a study. So I just got I managed to get the permissions and so on. And I followed all these contestants, right? And journeyed with them with how they studied their poems, how they learned it by heart. And I interviewed them. I learned about their family background. I just went through the whole spiel in that sense. I just found out as much as I could. And then we conducted workshops, right? So what we did was We had gallery walks. This workshop was held at the National Library, right? I facilitated discussions. I modeled a performance myself. Like I recited Kipling's If, one of my favorite poems. And then the participants would select a poem of their choice, and then they also reflected on the process. They shared feedback. And I'm suggesting, by the way, that reflection is important, right? It's not just about, as you rightly pointed out, it's not just the memorization, it's what happens before and after it that is so important. Okay, and then we had the competition itself. So I followed the students, right? And how did they feel when they were in that process, right? And it was magical in that sense because they shared they poured their hearts out, right? And then that's why I mentioned all this judging criteria, because it was about presenting a poem, doing justice to a poem. And that curation process is important. So how were those poems selected? Okay, I'll be happy to share as well if time permits. But essentially, there was a check and balance process. I worked with a team. And okay, in brief, I won't go into detail, but this is an interesting question that's applicable for all of our subjects, right? Then if learning poetry by heart is so helpful, then what text do we choose? There's so many out there, right? And I'm suggesting these could be some possible factors to take into account, that the students have to want to learn it. If they don't choose it, there's no point, right? Because there has to be that autonomy. And then there's the exposure to that wider canon, right? So it's not just a few texts, it's a wider diversity. And maybe something culturally relevant. Like it needs to make sense to the student. Like what makes sense to a student in Indonesia versus in Singapore versus in London is going to be quite different. So we need to take that into account. And then I interviewed the students, right? And these were my selection criteria. So a lot of factors to think about, but essentially really went to ask them in detail. So I'm just going to skip forward. These are their profiles, pseudonyms for all of them. I just went to ask them, right? And one of them was Indonesian, by the way, but Indonesian Chinese students who was sharing about her journey with poetry. And that's just a little bit about my methodology and study design. I conducted surveys, interviews, right? Participant observations. So in a full qualitative case study approach. I conducted my data analysis in terms of analysis and review, coding, recoding, clustering of teams, and so on. I think, Dr. Henricos, you mentioned that these codes, right? So yeah, I think that's something I thank you for noticing that, because that was something I took pride in excavating. And then the data analysis. So I was really looking at the patterns of the data. That was really important for me to figure out what is it that they were saying beneath the surface, right? And then just to summarize, okay, so now finally to findings and discussion points, right? I came up with a framework that summarized all of these points, right? Based on everything they said and did. And then I'm suggesting that the whole point of it is enrichment building, right? It's promoting process over product, right? Transforming thinking, perspective taking, and making connections, right? Just going to breeze through most of this last minute, right? It's about making connections, right? That literary knowledge should be organic and not isolated and predetermined, right? That when they were sharing their choice of poems, students were sharing that close connections between the text and themselves. So there was a student who memorized Maya Angelou's Phenomenal Woman because she was a feminist. So she was emphasizing that sense of choice. And then also it's all about transforming thinking, right? Just to see that you're seeing the same page, that it's about that sustained interaction with the text. It's about owning the text, right? And there was one student who commented that when she was reciting, somehow the poem took over her, right? There was a strange and fascinating and powerful experience. There was almost something transcendental about that, which I think it bears notice and observation and analysis. And then also in terms of transforming thinking, right? So it's not just the memorization, it's what happens after it, right? It's about valuable learning opportunities. It's about promoting the learning by heart, not just as an end in itself, but as part of an interactive and dialogic process, right? That it can be a communal activity, right? We can work in groups, we can have fun with a poem. That's so important, right? And also in terms of perspective thinking, finally, multiple perspectives, right? We can adopt a variety of viewpoints, right, towards the same poem, right? And it's about the experience. The process of learning by heart is more important than whether they learn a poem by heart or not. Actually, whether they can memorize and recite is besides the point. It's that process of journeying with a poem that is more important. Yeah. So, and more about perspective thinking, taking in terms of memory as a pathway to creativity and long-term appreciation and learning. That behind every person poem, there's a story behind it. Okay, conclusion. Last few slides, I promise. So, in terms of the implications and discussion points, suggesting that we could highlight the importance of transforming attitudes, right? That we can shift away. And I think this is so important for Singapore. We need to shift away from a fixation on results, right? And promote that focus on the learning process, right? And we give autonomy to the students, right? That the poems they choose to learn by heart tells us more about the students. And that's so important, right? That autonomy and guidance. If they ask, so what should I learn? That guidance needs to be provided. It's not intuitive or normal or natural in itself, right? And that there's so much about young people's culture that's performative anyway, right? TikTok, for example, so much about social media is performative. So why can't we bring that back to poetry? And then finally, again, let's bring back that, given the evidence, right, of the value of such participation, let's promote that lifelong learning, that reflexivity and criticality, right? That learning by heart is not just against, it's not as if it negates that criticality. If we can promote critical thinking and the learning by heart because they help one another, right? So even though this study has a small sample size, I'm suggesting that process of learning by heart can empower students. It can inspire greater confidence in themselves and in the process of learning by heart. Right. So with this, this concludes my presentation, right? And yes, I'm opening the floor to questions, right? Or ideas, comments, thoughts. Please feel free to email me. Happy to be in conversation and dialogue.
Okay, thanks very much, Waikit, for sharing the process of your journey writing this exceptional journal article. And it seems
Thank
like
you.
one participant, Bu Nadia, has
Okay,
already
I'm gonna
raised
stop share.
her
Yeah.
hand. Yes, okay.
Bu
Bu Nadia, okay, you
you
may
may
directly ask your question directly to Waikit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bu Yani, for the opportunity. And hello, Wikit. What a really nice presentation. I really enjoy your presentation. I think it's really, really interesting. But my educational background is not from linguistic. I'm from visual arts. Yeah, but I like to listen about TUM. And well, during your presentation, I remember about the theory that I have learned before from Mayer. It's about someone who learn with the picture. It can make easier to remember something. Have you ever tried, or maybe do you have any experiment, or maybe do you have any what is it, kinds of empirical study to combine the visual and also the text, because uh, I study about visual literacy, that usually children like to study with picture and also text, and it can make it easier for remember and also with some imagination. Okay, I think that's my question. Thank you so much, Wikit.
Thank you, Nadia, for your question. That's such a good question because, and I didn't know that your study is in visual arts. That's so apt because there's so much about
Yeah.
The impact of imagery in poetry, right? And that process of visualization is key to imagination, right? That unless we can literally envision in the mind's eye, if not, it's not going to sink in, right? So that you asked about empirical studies, that interestingly enough, there are studies about the power of visualization and also about the importance of imagery in poetry and in the study of poetry, right? So what I'm interested in terms of how that inflects my own research is I'm looking at how certain techniques that are influenced by the science of learning can then help students to reinforce or enrich that sense of visualization. So for example, right, for certain students, they might want to draw, right? Since you mentioned like visualization. Okay, and just to conclude my response really quickly, there are studies about learning by drawing. And I'm getting students to practice that kind of learning by drawing, meaning draw the images, just sketch. The nature of the drawing doesn't matter, but just a quick sketch of what they are envisioning in their mind and to see how that enriches and to talk about it. And that process of sketching and talking can be so helpful for students, right? So that's the next phase of the research because it's also based on the science of learning. Yeah, and learning sciences techniques. So I mean, I'm happy to share ideas, resources after this as well. Yeah, and I see, is it Dr. Henricus?
Yes, Pa Enricus is raising his hand. Pa Enricus, do you want to ask something
Yes,
or
okay.
give a comment?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Miss Yani. Yes, thank you so much. So I'm interested in about the method that you are researching on there about the memorization. So my question is, what's actually the difference between learning by heart and learning by rote? So when we do like memorization means that we also do kind of mechanic reading and also memorizing. And so what's the difference actually between learning by heart and learning by rote? And so we have a different learning situation, yeah, Singapore and Indonesia, yeah. So means that English is the first language here in Singapore, yeah, but it's not in our department, yeah, in Indonesia, yeah. So we might have like difficulties, yeah, in first probably in understanding the the content, the words of poems, and also the meaning and also the pronunciation itself. Yeah. Uh, so what can you explain how to deal with these problems? Yeah, how to cope up with these problems because Singaporean students might have different barriers, yeah, maybe in terms of memorizing poems, yeah, with we as Indonesian students, yeah, in memorizing English poems, yeah. Can you explain that? Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Enricus. Like, let me just share that brief slide as well, since I have it right here as well. That I think that this might be helpful in terms of, since you explicitly pointed out this point about learning by heart versus learning by rote. And I think it's, to put it another way, the attitudes are different. And the teachers' attitudes can be perceived by the students. Like the students can feel it if in terms of what we are driving at. I mean, every gesture, every word we utter in the classroom is so important because it inflects, it reveals our attitudes. And so, for example, the whole point of the lesson is for them, imagine if we were to say, oh, it's for them to memorize poem X, whatever poem it is, say daffodils, okay, or whatever poem, right? Then what's the point? What's the so what? I mean, students are going to get quite bored and they are going to ask why are we doing this? This makes no sense. I mean, so of course that's because that learning by rote. In other words, they are punished if they don't do it. Imagine that's essentially what's learning by rote, right? That it feels mechanical. There's no purpose behind it. There's with no understanding. They don't feel the emotions behind the lines. Then that's not meaningful, right? And that's how memorization has been practiced for hundreds of years in many systems, including the West as well, until very recently, until just a few decades ago. So that's not what we're driving at. What we're saying is that, is there a middle ground? Is instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, instead of just saying, oh, memorization is no good, we should never memorize, can we say, can we memorize just the right thing and just enough such that it helps students? And what is that thing? What is that right? What is the right text? What is the right extent? Then these are deeper questions, right? And that's what we mean by learning by heart. That is a sense of the whole heart, that emotional investment, that they feel like they must, that they want to. So, and that answers in a way your second question as well. When you are noticing the differences between the Singapore and Indonesia education systems. And I would say that, yes, it's true that while English is a medium of instruction in Singapore, in all schools, right, which grants students, therefore, some relative level of facility in the language, right, and some fluency, I would say that there is still quite a wide spectrum of abilities, even within Singapore. So depending on the types of schools, there are top range independent schools in Singapore. There are, and you know this, I think that there's a whole variance as well. I mean, there's a whole diversity of schools that in the school profile that I taught at the high school level, for example, if I just shared if I shared daffodils with them, that would go completely over their heads. There would be no way they will understand that, even though they speak English to one another. But that's Singapore English, of course, so it's different. So if I ask them to learn daffodils by heart, they will throw the poem at me, right? Because unless I make it explicit, unless, for example, I were to show that there are poems written in response to Wordsworth's daffodils in a Singapore context, then I might show that poem instead. So I think the key and the answer to your question is, in short, text choice. That scaffolding and text choice is so important. That sense of knowing the learner and knowing the content and matching the content to the learner in terms of that pitching, so crucial. So I might say, how about let's all, based on these 5 poems, which of these poems resonates with us the most and why? Can you talk about it? And then they practice learning just like 3-4 lines. And then they share that if they want. If not, it's okay, no pressure. Something like that. And just doing that alone, I suggest, might make a bit of a difference in terms of their engagement with poetry. So it's not just a dead thing that is to be studied. That poetry is something dynamic, it is alive. It can come alive for the students through performance. Yeah. Does that answer it?
Hopefully it
Yes.
answers your question.
Okay.
Pak
Yes.
Hendrikus.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Waikit. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. And ladies and gentlemen, and also Waikit, I have been warned by the committee that due to the limitation of time, I believe that we're going to end this discussion soon. But then it's been quite an exceptional experience for us, I believe, all of us here, for the participants, and also Waikit, I'd like to extend my gratitude and also thankfulness, because we all have learned so much from you and all of the discussants and also participants as well, because there's also one question from Bu Nadia. So I think to end today's discussion and also event, I'd like to quote what you have mentioned. You mentioned that a poem actually grows with us if we apply, learning by heart. And I think at the same time, the discussants and also us will also grow by learning by heart. So I think we need to start to consider applying this type of method in our class. All of us, most of us are teachers and students. So I think we need to implement this sort of radical perspective in our class, especially in the education of in Indonesia. So Waikit, it's been a pleasure for me to meet you. Hopefully when we visit Singapore, we can meet you and learn from you more. And
Thank you so much,
thank you so much also for Professor Ines, who has introduced us to Waikit, and all of the audience and participants who have joined this afternoon's talk. See you around in another occasion, and do not forget to fill out the certificate link that has been sent by the committee. Thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Bye, thank
Yeah,
you.
bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much,
Thank you,
Waikit.
Waikit. Thank you, Bu
Terima
Ines.
kasih, Waikit.
Miss Yani. Thank you so much.
Terima kasih Bu Puji,
Bye.
Prof. Puji.
Ya,
Bye,
thank you,
Bunda.
Bunda.
Prof.
Ya,
Waikit. Happy
Bu
birthday,
Yani.
terima
Waikit.
kasih Pak
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Hendrikus, Bu
Sama-sama.
Girindra.
Sama-sama. Yeah.
Waikit, we will send the photos and also probably the recording, right, Bu Nadia, to you later. Yeah.
Sure, that would be
Okay.
great.
Thank you.
Ya, thank you everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Have a great
Bye.
day.
Guys also,
See
like, that was
you.
so apt, and thank you all for your detailed presentations. That is just so impressive. Yeah, thank you. So
Thank
we can
you.
exit this
Sure.
just now.
It's okay. Yeah.
Okay, then I'll just.
Bye. Thanks very
Thank you so
much.
Bye.
much. Thanks everyone. Bye.